Welcome everybody. Good afternoon. We've just taken a couple of minutes whilst everybody gets settled. We've got a big crowd today, so really excited to see you all here, and really excited to be welcoming you to the first ABCD Igniter event. What you've just seen there on that last video is a brief overview of the ABCD programme, which is a unique and collaborative methodology for grassroots-led cultural recovery and innovation in Brighton Hove and the district around it. It's been a really exciting project that's ensuring that the creative industries locally come out of this pandemic stronger than they went into it, despite some of the challenges that we've had. So we're going to explore that a lot more, and I'll tell you a little bit more about the Igniter events and where it sits in with that. But welcome to those that have just joined. I'm Richard, and I'm Chief Executive of Always Possible. My team and I are really chuffed to be putting these Igniter events together as part of the ABCD programme. And these Igniter events are intended to explore, to provoke, to challenge, to celebrate creativity in all its forms. And we're looking at Brighton and Hove and Greater Brighton as a microcosm of the macrocosm, but we're welcoming everybody here today, whether you're from the city or outside. We're really welcoming national and international voices as well, so that we can really unpick what it is to be part of the creative industries in the 21st century. And so today's event we're calling Does Brighton Dare? And we're going to be exploring all sorts of ideas around risk and innovation and rule breaking and the kind of energy and leadership and creativity and where it's coming from and how we can foster it. And as you can see, I've got an extraordinary panel of special guests today, whom I'm going to introduce very shortly. Just before I do that, a little bit of housekeeping. This is a Zoom webinar and not a meeting, so we can't see you, but we do definitely want to hear your questions and some of your thoughts. So you can use the chat bar to create any comments or thoughts on what people are saying, and use the Q&A area to ask any questions. And if you see a question that kind of resonates with you and you like it, press the little thumbs up, and it will mean it will get higher up, and I'll definitely ask it then. And it becomes a priority question, so do that. We're going to keep you muted for now, because obviously there's lots of you and we don't want any background noise and so on, but do feel free to put your views and thoughts and ideas in the chat. We do want to see those. The session's being recorded so that people can access it afterwards, and so keep your cameras turned off if you don't want to be seen, etc. Good. Well, without further ado, to introduce my fantastic guests today, and what the format will be, we'll say hello to our four special guests, and then you'll hear from each of those. They've got about 15-20 minutes to talk through some of their ideas on this subject of Does Brighton Dare? And then the floor will be yours, so please do make sure that you come up with some questions, and as you hear the people talking, jot those questions down, and we'll come back to them at the end of the session. We'll make sure we've got time for that, and then we'll before we end, we'll talk about some of the other events and programs as part of the ABCD program as well. So I am absolutely delighted to introduce these four extraordinary women, and I'm also delighted to be absolutely outnumbered. It's, on this panel. That doesn't happen often, but it's a privilege. The first person I'm introducing probably needs very little introduction. A critical friend to the UK art sector for 30 years or more, who is a prolific author and playwright and makes Question Time worth watching whenever she's on it. Bonnie Greer OBE, how are you this afternoon?
I'm very well, Richard, and thank you for inviting me to this. And thank you for inviting me back to Brighton. I used to live in Brighton, so it's really great to be there.
It's an absolute thrill to have you here. And if you could sum up sort of what you're going to be talking about later in about 20 seconds, what would you say?
I'd say from a great age, there are no safe spaces. Go to the dangerous places. Boomers versus millennials. It's a phony war. Don't get caught up in that. We are in a time of intellectual and emotional stagflation, and reject the like culture and reject the influencer culture. It's a bridge to nowhere.
I'm so excited to delve into all of that very shortly. And I'd like to introduce everybody to Emily Berwyn. Emily is from Meanwhile Space. She is the queen of pop-up and of using underused or forgotten spaces in new and exciting ways, and is also spearheading another brilliant program as part of this ABCD recovery series. So Emily, welcome. How are you?
Thanks, Richard. I'm very well, thank you. Thank you for having me. It's really great to be part of this conversation and to try and sort of push some boundaries a bit and sort of challenge assumptions on what's possible. So I probably come at things from the opposite end to Bonnie, but of the very practical, actually have all this talent in this city, such creativity and the identity, but how do you bring that creative spirit out into the open, and what are the opportunities for doing that? And then it doesn't just have to be kind of the status quo and the sort of boring commercial approach. Actually, how do we explore what others are doing?
Fantastic, thank you very much. And they're such critical questions for right now and right here. I think, as you said, this is a city of extraordinary talent, but is not necessarily using it all as it could. Thank you. And then I'm introducing Helen Jewell, who is programmer extraordinaire, responsible for the eclectic and brilliant arts, dance, comedy, music program at the Old Market in Hove, and is a generous connector across the arts community locally. I owe her many drinks for many favours in the past. Always turn to Helen if you want an introduction to the right people. Helen, how are you?
I'm very well. Well, actually, I say I'm very well. I potentially have some COVID going on, but apart from that, Richard, I'm very well.
Oh no.
Oh.
Well, thank you for coming here despite that. It does seem to be everywhere. Who knew?
Well, who knew?
And what are you're going to be giving us a venues perspective later. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so from a very sort of personal point of view, really, I'm going to be talking about how the Old Market traversed through lockdown, the sort of things that the projects we were involved with, but also what we've learnt and how we think we can be useful in the post-pandemic environment, and how potentially we can impact healthcare going forward in our recovery as a city.
Fantastic, great, and a great counter to the narrative that we had early on, which was, that the venues will be lost and nothing can be done. And I think the resilience that's shown and these new ideas are really exciting. So it'd be great to explore that. Fantastic. And lastly, but absolutely certainly not leastly, and is going to kick off with the talks today, is Alex Barker, whose book How to Be More Pirate is an absolute must read. If you've not read it yet, then as soon as this finishes at 2:30, that is what you need to go and do. And Alex is a speaker and a provocateur and a writer, and is channeling the Be More Pirate movement, which you're going to hear about in
I like that.
seconds. So without further ado, I'm going to disappear and I'm going to hand you over to Alex.
Thank you very much. And that is a book plug that I don't usually give myself. So cheers, Richard. I'm going to start today by sharing with you probably my most pirate moment to date. Aged 8 at a pirate party where I went dressed as a mermaid. I remember this moment really clearly because I was adamant I didn't want to go dressed as a boy. Little did I know then that there were female pirates too, but I made my mum make me this really quite fabulous mermaid costume with her sewing machine, which, you know, you could do when in the days before Primark, when you made stuff at home. And I went and I enjoyed every single moment of that moment of rebellion. In hindsight, I can see that despite my costume, I'm clearly the most pirate person at the party, because Be More Pirate is first and foremost about giving yourself permission to break a few rules, to reclaim some agency in a situation and to go your own way. However, despite my childhood anomaly here, I, up until very recently, wouldn't have described myself as much of a rule breaker or rebel at all. I was pretty good at following rules, following the well-established trodden path in front of me. I thought that that was going to be the route to success. And it kind of was, to a degree, except for the glaring fact that I got to the point in about 2018 when I had to admit that I was completely miserable with my life. And that was really the moment when this book came into my life, Be More Pirate, which is written by my co-pirate and colleague, Sam Conniff, who's a social entrepreneur. However, this book came into my life. I picked it up, read 2 pages and put it right back down. I didn't initially really like it, and partly because I was completely judging the book by its cover. I looked at it and thought, this looks like a really good marketing concept, but it's a bit of a clickbaity subtitle, How to Take on the World and Win. And fundamentally, I was coming from a place of a lot of disillusionment with leaders, people with influence, who had this big promise of change. And I'd worked for 10 years in the charity sector, and frankly, it felt like things were getting worse rather than better. And so all these big change initiatives and the endless reports we were writing, where the hell was it getting us? I didn't think it was getting us anywhere. And I knew that we needed a more radical spirit. And so this book, I was drawn to this book, but I didn't yet believe the promise of it. And it was only when I saw a job advert for a right-hand pirate that I went back to the book, read it properly, because I realized this was the same pirate guy whose book I didn't like. And I realized that I'd never seen change presented in this way before. And although I still had questions, I applied for the job. I took all my healthy cynicism right to Sam's doorstep and said, you know, is your book more style over substance? And what do you mean by creating a global community out of this book? Like, I've seen endless networks being created, and why is this going to be meaningful? And he just said, you tell me. I don't know, I've got an email folder of about 500 largely unread emails from people who've said that this book is changing their life, that they are doing stuff off the back of it, that they're taking my words very seriously, and they are rebelling, they're creating a mutiny at work, they're quitting their jobs, they're starting over, and I don't know what to do with it all. And he was so honest and transparent as a leader that immediately made me trust him. And we went on this incredible adventure. And that's, you know, been a wild, wild ride. I began from that point of opening that huge email folder and starting to delve into the messages that people had been sending Sam and understanding their stories and what it meant. And my question was always, how do you be more pirate? I wanted to get to the practical level of it. What in the book was resonating so much, and how was it making them really make changes in their life? And I didn't ever imagine it would end up in another book, honestly, but there was so much substance behind it, it would have been a shame not to capture that. And because my background is communications, I knew that more people would take up arms if they could see other people like themselves doing it. So it became a whole new book. And I think that the first thing I want to say about what I took from our community, our crew, as we call them, was the line that stood out most in Be More Pirate, the line that was most highlighted as the starting point of the pirate journey was this one: no one is coming to save you. Like, the moment when you realize that all the external institutions and systems and leaders that you've long relied upon for safety and stability, frankly, are either incompetent or fragile. And actually, if you want to change your future, you're going to have to do it yourself. And I've heard that from endless other activists and campaigners since. They said that they've all had that moment of that scary, terrifying, but also liberating moment of realizing they've got to reclaim their own agency. So that was the first thing. And the second thing was that obviously we've all experienced this for the last 2 years, this kind of fracturing of the system, and realizing the stability is almost an illusion. We don't really have a story to support us in stepping into that power. And that's what Pirates was giving people, this overarching narrative that had some heroism in it, where ordinary people could do extraordinary things. And that putting on that avatar of pirates at a kind of like disguise gave people permission and power that they didn't otherwise have. However, I'm always contending forever with this version of piracy, which is in fact the kind of Disney version, the idea that pirates are these ridiculous cartoonish villains who are only out for themselves, who are lying and thieving. And in fact, most of what we know about pirates is actually fiction rather than fact, partly due to Walt Disney, but partly because the establishment always makes terrifying what it is in itself afraid of. So part of the mythology of pirates is because they were so threatening to the establishment, they villainized them on purpose. The reality of piracy was probably a little bit more like this. This is a scene from the 1700s roughly, because Be More Pirate hones in on a period of history called the Golden Age of Piracy, which is roughly 1700 to 1730. A moment in time when a group of ordinary citizens stood up against the establishment, challenged the status quo, realized that they were doing the bidding of this self-serving elite who were out plundering and exploiting the world. And they'd had enough. 40% of sailors died on any voyage. The conditions they were experiencing were dire. It's about the worst workplace conditions you could possibly imagine. And they'd had enough. A lot of them were really skilled sailors. So they decided to jump ship, form a crew of their own, and see if they could operate more successfully outside of the law, which came with its own challenges, of course, like they were being hunted down. And you suddenly had this situation where you're on board a new crew with no rules necessarily, completely blank slate. And so they had to figure out this completely new way of living and working together in opposition to what they'd experienced in the Navy, which is where the story is really interesting and what is uncovered in Be More Pirates. The new rules that pirates created, it's far less about the rules that pirates broke and is really about the ones that they made. First of all, real democracy. On a pirate ship, you had a one-man, one-vote system. The first strategic move to prevent conflict on board was to ensure that the rules were created by everybody through proper consensus. It's far less likely that you're going to mutiny against a rule that you yourself have created. So pirate crews are more democratic than what you saw in ancient Greece, and certainly more democratic than our system right now. They put proper checks and balances on power, again, something we still don't do today properly. Rather than having one captain and risking tyranny, they had a dual leadership system with a quartermaster who represented the crew, and both of those leadership positions could be voted out at any point in time. They gave everyone equal pay, roughly. Only roles that had more risk and responsibility had more compensation. Again, to prevent conflict, very strategic move. Nothing causes conflict like money, so they're very flat pay structures. They also gave compensation if you got an injury. So rather than being left for dead in a battle on a Navy ship, you would actually get either a peg leg or compensation for your woes. And it was strategic to incentivize the crew to take part in the battles. And of course, I'm sure there was the added benefit of people feeling that their lives weren't expendable in the same way. And pirates even had same-sex marriage. That became one of the rules in the pirate code, that if you were in a same-sex relationship, you'd be treated the same. And there was even a ritual ceremony for it and an inheritance clause in that meant that if your partner died, you get their share of whatever treasure they had. So it was really sophisticated and incredibly progressive. So that's a few of the new rules that pirates decided to create on board a ship. I hope that starts to convince you that they're more like innovators than troublemakers. But I think the really important point is that they didn't try and set out with this lofty ambition to change the whole world. They weren't actually moralizers. They were actually just about changing their world. It was like, what's my starting point? How can I make things better for myself? And what they did was create a kind of ripple effect. It was so appealing and so threatening to the establishment, more and more people wanted to become pirates. But what the rules that they created were in direct opposition to what they experienced. And I think this is a really good starting point and something I often use with teams. Start with this question. what are the rules? What is the status quo that you're experiencing? And what's interesting about this question when I do it with people is it's not so much about the explicit rules, the laws, the policies and the regulations that inhibit us and stop us from having permission to make changes. It's the implicit stuff, like the cultural norms that we've created, the unspoken assumptions. And quite often it's not until someone actually challenges those things that you realize that those rules even exist in the first place. So set out what are the rules to begin with. However, rule breaking is only one part of this. The pirate rebellion is creative. It's more about the rule making. So once you've identified the rules that you want to break, like found the seeds of frustration, it's more about transforming what you're fighting against into what you're fighting for. And that's why this whole movement has so much kind of optimism and like positive energy behind it, because it's more about the new, creating the new. However, in order to do that, to really get there, you have to be willing to start to inhabit the unknown. You don't get to something new, a new alternative, until you're willing to really get into the unknown and unfamiliar territory, what we call going off the edges of the map. Being willing to step into the darkness and kind of roam around for a bit. And off the edges, you have, of course, dragons, fear, but also opportunity, huge amounts of opportunity. And I break this down a little bit more clearly for people because it's a kind of abstract concept, and unless you offer some guidance. So I usually ask 3 questions on this. First of all, ask yourself, what is off the edges of your map? Like, what are the taboo subjects that you're not talking about, whatever sphere you're in, your team, your organization, your friendship group? What's being swept underneath the rug? And start there. Who is off the edges of your map? Who have you never had a conversation with? Who is off your radar? Who could give you an entirely new perspective on a problem? And whose life experience do you just not fundamentally understand? It will 100% give you unexpected insights. And then where are you not going? What spaces and places can you go to that will inspire or provoke new thoughts? Because environment has such a big impact on our mindset. And if you're not regularly disrupting yourself and getting out there, then you can't hope to be on the forefront of pioneering anything new. I want to give you one brief example of this from our book, because I think it makes it a little bit more tangible. And to show how it can be properly applied, I'm always for all the examples. So this is a sex shop, and it is a particular sex shop in East London called quite a sort of feminist, progressive one. 3 or 4 years ago, Macmillan, the cancer charity, did a report on health inequalities across London. And they created, as a result of that, a really, really diverse community of people who'd experienced cancer in different ways to try and understand the difference in experience. And one day, a young woman in the community came forward and said, you know what, the one thing that I can't get information on about my experience with cancer is sex after cancer, and not just sex in terms of my fertility, but sex in terms of pleasure. You know, once you've had cancer, your body's kind of rearranged entirely. And I can't find any guidance. Not only can I not find guidance, but no one even knows where to signpost me. And she was young. She was only 28. She'd recovered from Hodgkin's lymphoma. And she was very much on the fringes of this community because she was young. So she was someone who was kind of at the edges of the community. And so she suggested they do a sex and cancer workshop, which they did. After surveying the rest of the community, it turns out that lots of people would like information on this. And so they took it into, partnered with the sex shop, took it into there and allowed their experts to guide the women in the workshop. And being in that different environment, a non-clinical setting, opened up the conversation so much. It gave them, you know, allowed them to talk more openly about how it affected their relationships and their relationships with their bodies. And it was a pretty transformative experience. So this kind of represents all 3 aspects: somebody who was at the edges, going into a space that was at the edges, and tackling, of course, an uncomfortable topic, which is sex. However, being off the edges of the map as the final part of piracy, this isn't enough. You know, having pushed people to explore the limits of their courage and imagination in lots of different workshops and settings, it's not that alone won't get you anywhere, because in our really, really busy lives today, what we really need to do is create manageable actions that are going to start to move us into that alternative future that we're imagining. And when we started doing this work, we always asked the question, like, what's going to be your new rule? And people would go so big with their new rules that I just knew that they were never going to be manageable. There was no way these things were going to be actioned in the next few days or weeks. And then that's when hope dies, because the momentum dies and you go, nothing ever changes. And I think I heard it somewhere that the biggest obstacle to change is the belief, the collective belief that nothing ever changes. And so you have to demonstrate that change can happen in the most easy way possible, which is why I always tell people to come up with small, bold actions, something that will move the dial on your bigger rule rewrite or change that is easily logistically achievable in the next week, that is bold, as in it's something that's got to be out of your norm and put you on the edge of your comfort zone, but not so bold that you're risking anything really big, because then you risk burnout and, you know, pretty dire consequences. We don't want that. And ideally something that's also repeatable, because then you compound the impact of it. One final example I'll give for this, because I think to make it tangible for you, is a team that I worked with in a big local authority who really just wanted to change the culture. And they knew they needed to take some risks. They knew they needed to do something bolder, but they didn't have they had a pretty risk averse culture. So they needed to figure out something that was gonna just start that momentum for them and almost like have a quick and easy win. So they got together in a cafe down the road, started to test out some ideas, decided that they were going to create some new rules around email culture. But the critical thing was that they decided to put their new rules as part of their email signature. So it wasn't just about sending around an email once and saying these are our new rules. It was compounding the impact every single time they sent an email. And these were the new rules. Breaking the tyranny of email culture by thinking before I email, can I have a conversation instead? Taking protected time away from email to focus on the stuff that makes the biggest difference. Checking my tone. Am I structuring in a way I'd be pleased to receive? And if it's bad news, I won't deliver by email. So it's a kind of rehumanizing of the culture. And I know this might seem really not pirate and really not a big deal to many of you out there, but this is where it starts. Like, I've done this over and over and seen that you've got to create that initial momentum, start with the baby steps and build up to the bigger stuff. Because actually, with small, bold actions, it's not so much about getting the outcome you want straight away. It's about who you become in the process of trying and testing your tolerance for risk. That's the only way we're going to move more people into their own power and start to see much bigger societal changes happening. So if I'd leave you with anything, it is, what is a small, bold step you could take? I'll just take myself out of that. In the next week, that would put you outside of your comfort zone, and you can get done and you can demonstrate it. And if you can do it with someone else, all the better, because rules are created and broken socially. So give yourself the permission and take a small, bold step. Thank you.
Fantastic, Alex. I mean, I was inspired the first time I read it. I'm inspired again. Really clear examples there as well, and you know, loved the summary in the way you said it, that, you know, the obstacle to change is the belief that nothing ever changes. And I think some of those narratives do creep in, and I certainly think it's easy to kind of retreat and to believe that, well, there are external forces that are always going to stop something from changing until you do something about it. Brilliant. And I'm going to move on to Helen now, but what I'm going to ask is that the audience really think about some of those provocations that Alex has put there. Think about what some new rules could be, some principles that might underpin creativity in a city like Brighton and Hove. You know, what kind of bold things might need to be put in place to ensure that things happen that maybe haven't happened before, that open up accessibility, that open up opportunity, and how can Brighton have its own band of merry pirates? Wonderful, Alex. Thank you very much. We'll come back to you in a little while. So I'd like to bring back Helen Jewell from the Old Market, and I'm going to disappear now and hand over to you.
Thanks so much, Richard. So I was hoping to talk to you about an inspiring, hopeful post-pandemic landscape that we find ourselves in. And the truth is, I'm sat here pretty disheveled, surrounded by detritus of toys, uneaten snacks, and boredom. 2 days into isolation as my 7-year-old has tested positive for COVID. So this is not the face of a slick arts professional. This is the face of, I'm afraid to say, a weary single mum with COVID nipping at her ankles. This is the face of a vulnerable human, tired from the last 2 years. And I guess it's this very essence of humanity that we work and feel so strongly bonded to explore and connect with in the arts. So I'm the programmer of this wonderful little indie venue in Brighton and Hove called the Old Market. We are a 500 standing, 300 seated capacity space in the centre of the city. We host a diverse array of cross-genre arts, performance and installations. And I wanted to chat today a little bit about our trajectory through the last 2 years and where it has left us. So, in a bizarre apocalyptic atmosphere in March 2020, myself and my colleague Tanya slowly went around our much loved venue and switched off the lights. A building that we were used to seeing and hearing so alive, so full of life and laughter and applause, was completely silent and completely empty. It felt resonant at the time. We didn't know that we were facing what we were facing. We didn't know when we would be back. And I remember looking at the ghost light on the stage and wondering if and when it would be lit again. So at the beginning of the lockdown, we pined and we feared and we isolated and we wrote countless funding bids to try and keep our heads above water. Arts and culture felt like, I guess, the forgotten piece of a possible therapeutic solution, our road through the pandemic. And we knew it was essential to the mental and emotional health of our country, but we as a venue didn't really know how to support that without being able to bring people together. Could we have the second video, please? So thankfully, the government eventually granted us a pot of money from the Cultural Recovery Fund. We were one of the lucky ones, and we certainly didn't take it for granted. We wouldn't be here with the doors still open if we didn't get that money. It was absolutely crucial to us getting through. So we set to work using some of the funding to retrain our staff in filming and vision mixing and live streaming. And we started to play with the live stream format and see what we could do differently. We wanted to continue the work we'd started, building a program that celebrated kick-ass female artists under our Reigning Women banner. So we created a trilogy of live streams that celebrated the incredible array of female talent in the city. We had singers, rappers, poets, dancers. Whilst we couldn't have audiences physically in the space, we were grateful to be able to invite some brilliant artists to come and do their thing while we cut our teeth on a new format. Could we play the third video, please? Oh my, it was joyous to work on those live streams and to work with some artists in our space again. It was also joyous to explore how we might make our programme more accessible going forwards to audiences who couldn't physically come to the venue. We were able to connect with audiences internationally as well as locally, and we were able to learn new skills as a venue and work with young camera ops and production talent. So along with the live streams, we were also able to continue our Tom Tech programme. Anne-Marie, could we play the Tom Tech video, please? We launched Tom Tech 6 years ago in order to better support makers working at the intersection of arts and tech. We wanted to explore how tech can free the narrative potential of a show rather than hinder it. Tom Tech now forms our core thinking about what it is we do as a venue and what we need to do to stay relevant to both our audiences and the next generation. The programme mixes labs, industry training, commissioning, and public installations. We feel it's vital that cutting-edge tech is accessible to everyone and that there is equality of opportunity in learning what it can do. So during lockdown, with the partnership of the Hera Arts and Wellbeing Consortium, and I'll talk about them a little bit later, we were able to offer our lab programme digitally. Under the Hera Partnership aims, we wanted to continue the work we do around training artists to use new kit, but with a particular focus on accessibility, tackling inequality of opportunity, mentorship, connection and community, and health and well-being. Amongst other online courses, we trained artists in how to use lightform projectors. Now, lightform units are a device that auto-scans the environment to create a high-resolution mesh. And that mesh is easily layered with visuals and effects to create an augmented reality mapped video. These units enable us to projection map on a much smaller, less expensive scale. So we offered open call micro commissions adapted with consultation from our Hera partners, diversity and ability, to be accessible to low confidence and neurodivergent artists. 82% of our lab trainees were female and non-binary. 50% were from low income households, and 50% were neurodivergent or had a physical disability. As this pandemic has only proved, technology is inordinately powerful. And as long as opportunities for access lie with the rich and powerful, we are never going to change that dynamic. So big tech has compounded our sense of isolation and has been so divisive in so many ways during the last 2 years. But the project ideas coming out of these labs were essentially about human connection. How to tour visual memories to libraries and care homes. How to connect and reach people on the streets with exciting street projections during lockdown when people were isolated. This tech had the potential to connect us. And that's where I see our role as a venue going forwards. Humans are resilient and we are adaptable, but we aren't adapted to fighting crisis for 2 years. Mental health, isolation, grief, there is no one that this pandemic hasn't touched. Community, belonging, health and well-being are our urgent priorities now. We are neurologically hardwired to be in connection with each other. And I see venues like us as the connective tissue of our society. We're a place to celebrate the human condition. The Hera Partnership I mentioned before is a 5-year plan supported by the council to push a cohesive citywide health and wellbeing strategy, to provide social prescribing opportunities, creative and therapeutic workshops in collaboration with GP practices to support our healthcare system. Our role is not just to put on shows. Our role going forwards is to provide a system for recovery. A recent show we worked on as part of the Hera project was a beautiful dance show from a company called 201 Dance. Their show was based on Michael Rosen's SAB book, and the book described how Michael felt after the tragic loss of his son to meningitis. We invited some of the service users to see the show quite recently, and then to take part in some creative workshops supported by therapists and healthcare practitioners. One of the comments that we actually received only yesterday after the workshops was this: "Thank you for the workshop. I thought it would be useful for me, but I never expected to stumble across what might well turn out to be the long lost key to unlocking the grief process in my soul. That's why we work in the arts, and this is where the arts can help us to recover."
Wow, thank you, Helen. Absolutely brilliant example of how Brighton does dare, certainly how the old market dares. I remember attending the first launch of the TomTech program 7 years ago, and it was a mad idea of a friend of mine and yours and a few others, and just to see how that scaled up and how far that's now reaching and really leading is just brilliant. But how do we do more of it, and how does it reach more people, and how can we get more partners involved? And these are the big questions. How do we stop these things being an isolated pocket of brilliance and actually starting to really reshape what the arts can do, just as you've outlined. So again, we're going to come back to Helen when we do some questions at the end. Please get your questions all fired up, thinking about how venues like the Old Market and others can really be driving forward a new vision for what the arts can do to connect people well beyond just being entertained. As Helen said there, this is about social mobility, this is about health, this is about technology, it's about connection. There's some fantastic comments in the chat, and some really good insights and supportive messages and people looking to connect. Brilliant, that's what this is all about. So keep that going, and put it out in the ether on Twitter as well, and keep the questions coming in the Q&A box for in a little while. Great, so I'm now going to hand over to Emily from Meanwhile Space, and you're going to talk us through the extraordinary work that you've been doing. I'm going to disappear, and I'll come back in 10 minutes.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for having me. My name is Emily Berwyn. I'm Executive Director of a community interest company called Meanwhile Space, and also trustee of our sister charity, the Meanwhile Foundation. We have been going since 2009 as an organisation, basically trying to get hold of space to do stuff with, to do interesting things with, to bring local communities together, to deliver creative and cultural activities in spaces that have been forgotten or are underused. This is not a new concept. There's always been people doing really interesting stuff with vacant space, but this was more about creating a movement, sharing knowledge, not reinventing the wheel every time, trying to find ways to make it more of a standard industry norm within the property industry, which I think we are just about getting there with achieving. So we've taken on 70 spaces, all different types of projects, from office blocks, petrol stations, shops, car parks, all different types of things that I want to try and talk to you guys about, of how we can find space where there might not be space. Most of our spaces are colourful, they're vibrant, they're about demonstrating that we are here for a period of time and to come and get involved. Sometimes we build spaces, sometimes we take over others. We've used toilet blocks, we've used former tile showrooms, council offices, all sorts of things. What I wanted to talk to you guys about today is it's coming from the space perspective and thinking of Brighton and Hove as this wonderful creative and cultural city that is so well known for that in part of its identity and appeal. And actually the changing landscape of who is able to live in the city these days, and actually is it affordable for people to live and work in the city if they are from the creative industries. I'm from Brighton myself. I grew up here, I went to school here, I left and have never really been able to return because of the high prices, but I still have lots of family living in the city, and so I experienced it from their perspective. But also I've tried to make a number of different meanwhile uses happen within the city over the last 13 years, and to my frustration and embarrassment, haven't been able to really make that much impact. So I think it's worth us kind of exploring that and what the opportunities are through this series of discussions. But the commercial vacancy levels, the traditional shops within the city, particularly in the city centre, are so high, and the business rates are so high that this poses significant challenges for any landlords wanting to do anything different. They've got that real issue, cost barrier to doing so, and maybe shareholders or people who are backing them that won't necessarily allow anything below a market rate, and really creates barriers for creative or cultural use of anything that is standard. But meanwhile use is a tool that creative people can use to seek out and activate space, to bring their ideas and their talents out into the open, to connect people, to engage with local communities, to really sort of demonstrate those talents and create a wider view of what they do. But how do we unlock these spaces so that creative people can stay in the city, that they can continue to flourish and grow, that they have the space to do that, that they have the space to do what they want to do and bring those ideas to life? Just starting very briefly on context, I think of my view, having grown up in Brighton, is very much of Brighton being this kind of creative, fun-loving place where people can enact change. It's a place of activism and enthusiasm and community. And how do we make sure that that's present on our streets so that people visiting and living in the city can see that on a day-to-day basis? These kind of images, we all know, they're very much the USP of Brighton. Festivals in the park, Pride, all this wonderful cultural activity that we know and love, and the latest campaign of Never Normal. Who wants to be normal? Is very much what Alex was talking about, of challenging the rules, and Brighton as a city is very good at doing that. And how do we maintain that as something at the forefront of our minds? In actual fact, the reality is, when you come out of the station, you're met with quite a series of sort of bland experiences. That sense of vibrancy doesn't hit you in the face when you arrive, particularly by train, but by other methods, or whether you're, you know, entering the city centre as somebody who lives nearby as well. And you walk down Queen's Road. This has long been a bugbear of mine, of it's really quite drab. Why doesn't it demonstrate more vitality and vibrancy that actually the city wants to show that it has within it and is part of its identity? And if you're coming around from the station, really, and you know, I know, being a property professional now and working in these areas, that it's not as easy to just say, oh, well, that space is a real mess and it needs to be worked on. But actually, these are the things that people are being presented with as they are engaging with the town, and this is the experience that people are getting, and it's not necessarily matching the identity that we're trying to portray. So pop-up shops are sort of one way to approach this, of not only as a creative person, getting your work out there and being more visible, but where pop-up shops are not necessarily available, how do we explore different spaces? So where shops are too expensive, either from a rent perspective or service charge, business rates, if it's too crippling that actually you can't do anything other than sell loads of commercial goods, where else can we look to? Bear with me 1 minute. Okay, so one of the projects that Meanwhile Space ran is on a former disused car park in Wood Green, and this was really saying, well, actually, what could we do with this space? And within 9 months, we'd turned it into a series of 2-story sheds for making on the upper floors and selling on the bottom, and studio and workshop spaces in the Blue House. We have a cafe that runs from the bus, and lots of markets and events that run from the yard. We worked with a series of apprentices and volunteers to build, to train and build the sheds themselves. And we had some grant funding from the local authority, but we also brought some capital funding ourselves. And the popularity of this is really quite important. So the strategy behind this is that the council has a programme of regeneration in the area. They know that certain buildings that are owned by private landlords that house a huge number of creatives from a sort of business and art studio perspective was closing. They were worried that they were going to lose the essence of creativity from the neighbourhood, from the area, as they go through that regeneration process. So this was really a strategy to develop, test and grow creative uses that they may end up staying within the area on a longer term basis, but really to create that sense of place, that vibrancy that people would come to Wood Green and would know it for. This is the Bus Cafe. I mean, it's certainly quirky. I'm 5'4" and I can just about stand up in it, but yeah, people absolutely love it. Inside the Blue House building, really light touched refurb using paint, bright colours, just to really make an impact and a difference from the youth services offices that it was before. And one of our long-standing tenants, who was doing her PhD and wanted to run some ceramics workshops, took over a space there just to test it and see how it got on. They were so popular, she's ended up moving on a permanent basis to a nearby premises. Semstresses, we've got quite a density of semstresses there. all manner of different types of products that they make. And what's really interesting now is thinking about actually how we transition people into alternative spaces as that site is looking to be redeveloped over the coming years. Some other examples, not all of these projects are Meanwhile Space projects, by the way, but I will say where they're not. This is an urban space management project looking at rooftop in Stratford. So this was more about playfulness. The top floor of this car park wasn't really used very much. And they thought that they could repurpose it for kind of fun leisure activity, bringing kind of culture and creativity to that as well. So they run cinema events, they have a bar, but they also do pitch and putt. They do baseball. They have baseball nets, but they've run a number of series of different exhibitions and activities throughout the period of time that they've been there. Another rooftop car park project in Peckham, Bold Tendencies with string quartet orchestra. Amazing, actually the acoustics of this building are really incredible, but it is just a car park. You can see from the top here, they had a cafe, they have exhibitions that are changing. It's a sort of returning project that they come back every year, and actually has the demand demonstrated to the council that they should invest in the rest of the car park, and it has become what is now called Peckham Levels, run by Makespace, Makeshift, sorry, and is a series of workspaces and other creative uses throughout the rest of the building. So this is a site project. This is one of the drawings for a site project in a housing estate just south of Victoria in London, where the estate regeneration programme is quite long, and the council wanted to give something back to the community. So this was on one of the derelict sites, one of the early stage demolitions, looking at how could we bring activity, people to the area, services for the local community. There's a community hall that's bookable by people. There's events and markets that happen there. There's lots of different activities that happen there, but there's also an incubator space where people can test and trial their different uses within that space. Another site project that's was by an architect called Ash Sackler is the Caravan Sarai project in Canning Town. They literally just took over a site and started building and doing things on it, bringing people together, talking about what they wanted to do, getting lots of waste materials, building barns and stages, and actually what was supposed to be quite a short-term project evolved into quite a long-term project, and a really strong community volunteer-led programme of things happening over quite a considerable period of time. Other examples, this is a project of ours in East London. It's a whole street that's due to be redeveloped in the coming years. So actually there was lots of antisocial behaviour there. A lot of the shops were already closed because it was due for demolition soon. So we took it over and we painted the whole street. So we got people from the local community to bring patterns from their culture and things that were important to them to bring forward, and we created this sort of really energetic, colourful streetscape. And then we supported people to come and do interesting things from within those spaces. So lots of different activities, including a kind of a barber that's running a sort of virtual barber process, and a podcasting station, a boxing club, all sorts of different types of activities that really were driven by the community. Another example of kind of taking over space that maybe you don't need to have access to the whole building was a project that we ran in Sutton, which worked with a local artist, a project called Branch Lines, and sort of decorated and used this whole project space as a sort of advertising board and sort of demonstrating local talent and bringing it out in a different way. Other examples are arches. So we work a lot with arches. This is in Loughborough Junction, and a lot of arches in incredibly poor condition, which are quite difficult to use. We ran a competition working with a really young architecture practice to design what we were looking for, which was a sort of standalone structure that could slot in and out of different really poor condition arches, so they could be there just a couple of months, but can provide a watertight, warm, really beautiful space that people could come and do performances or recording studios or whatever it was that they wanted to use that space for. And actually putting them down this street has made a huge difference, and we're looking at how we roll that out now. Other similar examples, this is a project again in East London near the Olympic site by Assemble, an architecture collective who ended up going on to win the Turner Prize. This was an underpass of the A12, really, really huge, horrible road that they turned into a folly, into a space where people could come be creative. They could host exhibitions and events and activities, but just kind of goes to show that actually it doesn't need to be an actual space. It could be anything that you're not really sort of noticing or realizing could be an opportunity. So just to finish, I think that what we really need to do is to increase the access for space for the creative industries, but that involves looking around and seeing what there is. There will always be lag space, so it isn't enough to say that Brighton and Hove, being such a booming city, has no space and never will have any space that is accessible. Even in the standard development cycle, you always have space where it's not being used for periods of time, and it's understanding that process and bringing people along that journey, whether that's local authority, developers, or others, to really understand the opportunity and the potential and the need for those kind of activities during those periods of time. And then how do we make those projects ambitious, impactful, so that they really support the identity of the city as a creative destination for creative people, and how do we go about being proactive in unlocking those spaces that will really need people to put their money where their mouth is. So it's not free to take on a space, there's always costs involved, but also local authorities and developers and other landlords taking sort of responsibility and buying into this as an idea that will benefit the city in the whole, so that people can have space to flourish and grow, and that actually we're not waiting till there's a real problem situation where all the creative people have left the city and actually that identity and that reputation is no longer valid. And that's me.
Emily, again, brilliant. I'm really enjoying this afternoon. I don't know about anybody else. Well, I do know about everybody else because people are showing a lot of love in the chat for all of our presenters, which is great. Lots of brilliant ideas connecting to what's being discussed. Emily, those examples are extraordinary and really inspiring. And I know, you know, having been in and around Brighton for the last 25 years, the conversations around public realm and around space has, you know, it's been going round and round and round in circles. And I think what I hope now with all of this kind of energy and a bit more of a grassroots approach is that something can finally be done to spark something new. And I think your work and the examples you're given you know, are a step towards that. So we'll come back to you at the end like everybody else. There's some questions coming in the Q&A, which is fantastic. They are great questions, and we will come back to those. Keep them coming, keep them coming. But to our final speaker, but one that I know so many people are here for today. To Bonnie, over to you. How can Brighton dare?
Richard, thank you. I live in Soho in London. Now, I used to live in Brighton. I loved living in Brighton. I just loved being on the pier. And, coming from Chicago, I was born on the south side of Chicago. We didn't have the sea. We didn't have a channel. We didn't have that. So for me to just be able to see the water and to see the pavilion, all that every day was really important for me. Now I'm in the middle of Soho, which I love as well. I'm a metropolitan, so I like being in big cities. I like the noise and everything. And, I'm listening to everybody and thinking, gosh, these brilliant women they're showing you something. I don't have anything to show you. I don't have any slides or anything, but I was just thinking about how three of them have made me think about my life and what I've done. So I will take bits from each of their brilliant presentations to tell you what I want to say. So I've thrown out everything I was going to say, and I'll say this. I loved Alex's, your be a pirate. And I realized I've always been a pirate. In fact, one of my favorite movies is Robin Hood, the version with Errol Flynn. I mean, I always saw myself swinging through the Greenwood, taking from the rich and giving to the poor. I mean, I just thought that's the way you should live. And I think that is the way you should live. And I don't mean violently, but in a way, move things over from people who have things or share and with the people who don't. So that's always been important to me, and part of being a pirate or being a Robin Hood or being on the margins is what I call stay stupid. I like being stupid, and I'm telling you, there's stuff I literally don't know, and that's on purpose. I don't want to know who's the most famous person out here. I don't want to know who's got all the awards. I don't want to know any of that. I'm not gonna say where I was yesterday, but I was at an exhibition of a big artist, and the curator took me in with really great pride to see this exhibition. And as we were walking along, the curator said, and the work you're going to see was made in China. And I turned around and said, you mean this artist doesn't make their own work? And the curator said, what? I said, I mean, somebody else makes their work? And they got really upset with me and said, well, Damien Hirst doesn't make his own work. And I thought, he doesn't? So that's what I mean by stay stupid. There are artists, the only artists I know actually do things with their hands and stuff. I didn't know other people sent stuff out to get made. So maybe Michelangelo did, I don't know. So I really try not to learn and understand a lot of what's in the zeitgeist, because sometimes that can get you clogged up. And I'll give you another example by stay stupid. I was invited to, as someone says, Spielberg doesn't film his own films. No, he's not a cinematographer. The other thing, I was at a talk. I was invited to sort of compare a talk. And I was really excited about going there. This was going to be a debate over Tolstoy. And then there were going to be actors who were going to perform Tolstoy. So I was really, really excited to be there, because Timothy West was going to be one of the actors who I have a really great admiration from. Is probably somebody most of you have never heard of, but I just love him. And then Simon Schama was going to be there as one of the debaters. So I went to sort of compare this thing, and there were people around the corner, some women had flown in from Moscow or something. And I'm like, what's going on? They come to see Simon Schama? What's happening? So I went in, and I was sort of staying in the back and doing my work. And they were actually making a roped off area with the audience so that the audience wasn't up front. And so I thought, what's going on? So I saw a guy who was one of my students at RADA who was in it. I used to do like these seminars at RADA, which are basically telling people don't enter the theater profession because it's not what you think. And if you're going to be in the theater, you better be strong, because you can be on stage studying for 3 years, and the guy who just won I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here is going to be the star of the show. You're going to be the backup, and the people that bought the tickets for the guy who was on I'm a Celebrity. So, make sure that that's what you want to do, because if you want to be in the West End or whatever, you're going to have to endure that. So I gave those kind of like, they call them tough love talks. So I'm thinking, why is everybody here? So there were like 800 people. We did the thing. And so I've realized they all came to see my ex-pupil, Tom Hiddleston. I didn't know Tom Hiddleston. I know Tom was this big deal. I was just really shocked. And I said, what? And I just knew Tom from an afternoon where I did a seminar. Well, we become friends because I don't know what Tom does. I mean, I go to see his stuff. We hang out sometimes, but I didn't know that he was that big a deal. And I like staying in that kind of space, because that's a creative space when you don't always know who or what something is. I loved what Helen said about really the ghost light. I mean, my background is the theater, and I always keep the ghost light on. You always got to keep the ghost light on. Keep a part in yourself where you believe in yourself. No matter what people say, no matter what they don't do for you, you have to do that. If you don't do it, you can't make it. So the ghost light is always on for me. I just did a play. We just had a play, very short run. It was only 40 minutes long. And I sat there and I thought, I really want to do plays that are 40 minutes long, because I like the fact that the audience comes in and they go out. I know producers can't make money off of those kind of things. That's the other part of the theater. But I really like the compression of that. So I'm going to try and figure out how to do more plays of that duration. But I've been making plays since I was a very little girl, and I always will do that, no matter if they're produced or not. So always keep that light on. And if you get bad reviews, always keep that light on. And I also, the other thing I wanted to add was, because I've lived a long time, so I'm gonna give you anecdotes. I know this great jazz musician, Henry Threadgill, very great jazz musician. I'm from Chicago, and he was very, prominent in the jazz scene. And I asked him once, when you hear a great jazz musician, or you go and hear some great music, what do you feel? He said, I prepare to do something else. In other words, never imitate anybody. I try not to. Sometimes I do accidentally, but I don't follow anybody, and I don't imitate anybody. So it's always kind of interesting for me when people ask me, people say you're this and you're that, and I'm thinking, well, am I? I mean, I don't know that. And I like staying in that space. I've been in that space since I was a child, and I'm going to stay there. And I like what Emily said about don't reinvent the wheel. Please don't reinvent the wheel. I said at the beginning of my talk, this thing about boomers versus zoomers and boomers versus millennials, it's a phony war. It's a phony war. It's been going on since human beings have been alive. It's phony. Don't waste your time. Don't even get involved. Do your work. Don't do what other people are doing. And that's called creativity. Just really look at something and go, right, now I'm going to do something else. It's very important. We're in a time where we have a lot of what I call intellectual stagflation. We got a lot of ideas, we have a lot of emotion, and we got a lot of scared people. We got a lot of people who are afraid to proceed because it's not correct. They won't like me. I won't, my Instagram page or my TikTok thing will be taken down. I did a question time in 2010 with this guy, Nick Griffith was on it. He was head of the British National Party, big fascist party. And I was raised by my father. He grew up in rural Mississippi during the 30s, where Black people couldn't speak, especially Black men. So my grandmother, his mother, got him out of town because my father was very outspoken. And my father grew up in the same town that Emmett Till, if you look him up, was murdered, and people are still talking about him now. So my grandmother got him out. And my dad always said to us, don't ever stop somebody from speaking. Just be better than they are. And so I went on this question time and I got a lot of, before I went on, I think I was on the speed dial of The Guardian. Every journalist almost on The Guardian called me. The Times. I lost friends. I lost a dear friend. A lot of people who were righteous people, and I mean that in a good way. Still very emotional, actually. And who were fighters. That's funny. Who were fighters on the left, and they said, please, we deplatformed this guy. We've no platformed this guy. We've canceled this guy. If you go on, you've affirmed him. And I thought to myself, what my father said, I just got to be better than him. I just got to have the facts. So I went to the British Museum. I was on the board at the time, another, for a lot of people, canceled space. And I'm back there. And they gave me all the information I had to give this guy. So his whole website was about, there are things called Indigenous Brits, which of course is crap because everybody in this country is an immigrant or descended from an immigrant. There is nobody who is indigenous to this country because after the last glacial maximum, there was nothing left but the oats plant. So that's what I told him. And it ended him, and I understand ended that party as well. So I know this is not fashionable. I know that people don't want to be hurt. There's stuff that's said that should not be said, but I'm really opposed to to people not speaking. I think people should speak. I am opposed to statues coming down, and the reason I am is because I think you should curate, not obfuscate. Like in South Carolina, they wanted to take down Robert E. Lee, the head of the Confederacy, and also a traitor to the United States. What the Black people did with him, with that statue, instead of taking it down, they put 3 Black soldiers around Robert E. Lee. And now what's able to be done is people can come and they can hear the whole story. That's what we need to do, is to tell the whole story. So I'm going to conclude by saying that being a pirate is the most important thing in the world. Stand outside a little bit. Be outside of it a little bit. Stand back a little bit. Don't want to be liked so much. Don't want to be applauded so much. Don't know who's in front of you or behind you. Do your work. And you'll be rewarded, I guess, by yourself at the end of the day. And go to the dangerous places. There are no safe spaces in this life. That's me.
That is you, Bonnie, and what a you that is. I love it, absolutely love it. I've been furiously scribbling down: curate, don't obfuscate, stay stupid, ignore the zeitgeist, be better. I mean, that's great advice for anybody. It's remarkable advice for a place and a space and a city and a collective, I think, because it's very easy to forget a lot of that. It's very easy, certainly very easy to get caught up in being liked. And I think when you look at creative and cultural strategies of a place being popular, being liked, being of the kind of time is often seen as more paramount than actually some of those things that you've talked about.
Richard, can I say one more thing that I forgot? Is that we are in an age where there are a lot of ideas out there, and I'm going to say 70% of them are bad. And what I mean by bad idea is not that they're evil, is that they either don't have any history connected with them, so you're reinventing the wheel, which Emily said, please don't do it. It's the most dangerous thing that can happen, and actually it's what the establishment wants you to do. They want you to reinvent the wheel. They love it because they already got the program. I've told people, people were going with me about, they did all the Emmy Awards, but they didn't nominate any Black people. I said, why do they have to? All of us are now on the board. They don't have to give you an award. That's not what you asked for. And why do you want an award anyway? So, just don't reinvent the wheel, go forward, don't be with the establishment, and don't want anything from them. They can give it to you, and that's great. Take it on behalf of your ancestors and the people who've gone before you, but don't want it.
Thank you so much. Right, so we've got about half an hour, and I've got the absolute privilege of having these 4 extraordinary women and their projects, wisdom, philosophy, experience to draw upon, and there's a whole bunch of you who want to delve into some of the great ideas that we've had put in front of us, which is, who if you're not here, then you're missing out. First question is from Polly, and it's for all of you, and it's about the relationship between risk and resilience. So we've heard, from Helen and others around the effect that the pandemic has had specifically. But what does that mean for a city like Brighton and Hove? We've had our resilience tested. We've got an opportunity to rethink what risk might mean. How do they work together? I don't know who wants to take that first. Maybe I'll come to Alex if you've got any thoughts on that as a while.
Yeah. So I'll approach it, but not in the Brighton context, because that's not perhaps what I know so much about. My response would be that risk can and does increase resilience, but it completely depends on how you do it. And I get a lot of briefs from companies asking me, how can you help us take more risks? And I just say, first of all, unpack what you actually mean by risk, because language is so imperfect and it means different things to different people. And if you're a CEO or a leader in a team going in and saying, we're going to be more risk-taking, we're going to be more pirate, really step back to appreciate what that means for your team, because risk is subjective. It's built on our personal lived experience, the levels of privilege, power we have. And I think everyone should take a risk. I do. I absolutely do. It's the most important thing where you can make progress, but let everyone start where they are, manage that risk in a proper way, push people, but enable them to do it in such a way that they don't go too far too fast. So, and that's when you get the resilience building. So that's where I would say to start.
Great. And Helen, is the old market now more resilient because of the risks you've taken?
Well, I hope so. I mean, we're still on a bit of a knife edge, to be honest with you. I don't personally have a programming budget anymore. So we have an awful lot of work to do in terms of fundraising to get back to where we were before. But the thing I will say is that when we have taken risks in our programming and our projects, it has been the most beneficial trajectory for us by far. For instance, a few years ago with my esteemed colleague, James, who I know you know very well, Richard, we put on a show called Doom Room, which was a show from Denmark. And it was a virtual reality live show where we encouraged people to come into a very strange environment, meet a completely naked actor, and then be propelled into a David Lynchian underworld where they shot themselves in the head and then went into some kind of dungeon scene. And James and I were looking at this show going, I have no idea how Brighton is going to take this. Are we going to be really upsetting people? So we put a huge amount of trigger warnings on this show, and we invited people to come in and take part in what we thought could be potentially very, very upsetting. And it was one of the riskiest shows we've put on at Tom. And the reactions from people that came in and took part were astounding. People had spiritual awakenings in this show. We had some incredibly positive responses. And we were really scared about putting it on, but actually it propelled us forward. And I think art needs risk. Otherwise, why on earth are we here if it's not to be risky and to question and to propel ourselves forward? So yes, I would hope that at some point we have the opportunity to carry on being risky, because that's why we're here.
It is why we're here. Thank you. And Emily, how does that translate into space? I imagine many of those examples you gave could have lost loads of money, could have upset people, might have obscured the views, and but how much risk do you need to take in creating new spaces, and how does that build resilience?
So I think there's two things here for me. So one of the things is that if you are doing things on a temporary basis, you can be more risky. You almost need to be a bit more risky. The opportunity is there for you to experiment and do things that you wouldn't be able to do on a longer term basis. So you can test a model, you can be more extravagant with the way that you are putting something into the public realm, because it's not going to be there forever. And people can get used to that. They can get used to a different use or activity. You can prove its viability. So we're really keen on risk, and the risks that you can take through the temporary period that you wouldn't be able to take once people start to go, well, hang on, that's going to be there forever, so we don't like that idea. The other thing about risk is that I think we attract those that are willing to take risks. And what was really interesting to us through the pandemic is we had 160 tenants, but as we were supporting them through that journey, was that lots of people who thought they were agile and experimental and risk takers actually couldn't behave that way when push came to shove. And so they were the ones kind of burying their heads in the sand, not able to adapt and evolve at the speed with which we all needed to do so during particularly the early days of the pandemic. And that was really surprising to me, because we partner with everybody on every project that we do. And a lot of the partners who I thought were really experimental and had that kind of very inherent driver in them were really struggling to adapt and evolve. But those that did, those that were less afraid of what happens if I take this punt and what happens if I go down this road, have survived in a much more kind of mental health well-being way, because actually the pressure is less. Mm-hmm. And if you make a mistake, that's okay. And we talk a lot about the opportunity to fail as well being very important. You can take risks, you can fail, that's fine. That's how anybody gets good at anything. But actually culturally it's not something that we do very often. Mm-hmm. So I think risk definitely breeds resilience as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you. And Bonnie, do you think come out of this pandemic the creative industries will take more or fewer risks?
There are a couple of points around that. I just want to say briefly, in 2019, I used to be deputy chair of the British Museum, which for a lot of people is a deeply contested space. I'm gonna put it nicely. And the director of the museum, present director, Harvick Fisher, asked me to come back and maybe build a project with him. And we came up with something called Era of Reclamation, where we have very, we have conversations on stage that are really hard ones to have in a place like the British Museum and other places. I didn't know if anybody was going to come. I mean, I know people of color, particularly, who won't set foot in there, or if they're coming, they're going to come with a placard. Okay, so I didn't know. I knew that whatever happened, I was going to stand on the stage and be myself and tell them the truth, my truth, if they didn't want to be there. We've been very successful. And it's a risk every time, because this is very emotional for a lot of people. This is very political for a lot of people. There's some people I call racial capitalists who come, who have no skin in the game, but they're on a particular point of the political spectrum and they got to be there. And it's face-to-face stuff. You do have to mitigate the risk. You have to think about, who's going to be there? What are they going to do? Nobody wants to be insulted. Nobody wants to be told off. Nobody wants to have an audience full of somebody's followers and some really articulate person stands up and, you're booed, because we go out on YouTube as well. You just don't want that. But I feel very strongly that so-called contested spaces that are risky, are exactly where we need to be, politically, emotionally, and everything else. We need to be there. We do have to have difficult conversations in public, and your generation is the one who must do it. You must, because if you don't do it, you're gonna be doomed. The other thing I want to say too is that we are a resilient species. If you're a woman and you've given birth, you know what the hell I'm talking about. We're here, we've survived, we can survive it. But we can only survive it if we turn around, as David Bowie says in Changes, and face the strange. If we don't face the strange, and if you're too scared to face the strange, it ain't gonna happen. And I'm telling you, these little Zoomers and the Troomers are out there, they're looking at us and they're checking us. And we need to give them a world in which they can be themselves and say and be who they are and tell their truth. It's the only way we can go forward.
I feel a lot of responsibility now. Thank you. Emily, lots of questions and lots of chat earlier about, in response to your presentation, around particularly how to unlock some of the spaces in Brighton. I mean, you gave examples of the what greets you when you walk out of the train station, something I've long despaired about. Kathy from Brighton Gin says, as someone who spent the last 2 years trying to find space with her company to expand into and to create something brilliant, multi-dimensional, as a food and drink business, that's obviously also something quite powerful in Brighton, but struggling to engage the council to think more creatively. Brighton Hove City Council is a big stakeholder in all of this. They're not the only one, but they're a big one. And Nick Hibbard, who is very senior in the decision maker, will be joining one of these events to be part of this conversation next month. So they're listening and they're game. But
can I say something corny? And I'm going to say something corny in relation to Brighton. I like being a foreigner. I've been here half my life, but I still don't know a lot of stuff. And I like staying in that space. I call my stay stupid space. When I come out of the train station at Brighton, I head for the sea. Now, I head for the water. Now, I know people don't do that. I know people live there. I know people live in areas where, and I've lived in areas where it wasn't, you didn't have a panorama, you didn't have a view of the channel, you didn't have a view of the sea. But you know what? It's inside people. It's in them. And how do you make that? How do you make that visible? How do you make that conscious for people? Because that town is a magic place. I mean, I know that sounds like a horrible thing to say, but Brighton is a place that has a lot of potential for all kinds of magic.
I did some analysis on footfall quite recently and actually monitored where people go out of the train station, and so I think they were able to segment who was kind of new to the city. So most people head down to the pier.
So right down, right.
But then the second highest group go to Primark. And that is the second biggest reason for people stepping out of the train station, and it's where they head to. Emily, what do you make of that? And how do you engage the council as a kind of stakeholder in this?
Well, we work with a lot of local authorities, and doing these kind of projects, you really do need a lot of people on board. They're not easy. You need partners for when things go wrong. I think that it's a real challenge when a local authority isn't being led from the top in that direction, and you might have willing officers, but actually what they're receiving is quite a lot of criticism for what they're trying to do on a day-to-day basis, and not a lot of support to make this happen. Although there are, certainly with our parallel series of programs that we're running on Meanwhile Training, we've also got a session in a few weeks with the enablers, so the local authority and the Business Improvement District and landlords and developers, to explore this in a wider detail of what they can do. So rather than saying you should be doing this, why aren't you doing it? Everyone else is doing it really well. It's more saying, well, actually, what are the barriers to you doing this? Where are they? Where are you being blocked? And here's another location that has managed to unlock that, and they've done it in this way. So it's kind of an empowerment approach rather than a critical approach is what we're going for. But there, in a city like Brighton Hove, there should be a strategy. There should be a meanwhile strategy, because space is such a premium, and it is available. It's just available for shorter periods of time, and it's the more unusual spaces. But we do a lot of strategies for local authorities. But we have also done projects where local authorities are not interested, and they become interested once you've started doing stuff. Mm-hmm. So we do a lot of work in Hastings, and we've got a great partner there in the local authority now, but it hasn't always been that way. We started doing things, we demonstrated we could, and then they get it. Once you've kind of proven that it's viable and that you're not going to trash something, which is the same for landlords as well, then a lot more people kind of get on board.
Yeah. Whilst I'm talking to you, and we're on this theme because I think it's related, I'm going to bring in part of Nick's question, which is around the line between redevelopment and gentrification.
I saw that. Yeah.
There's a lot of pop-up spaces that become synonymous with a very expensive vegan kimchi, takeaway or something that a lot of people are not going to go and use because they won't feel that's for them. So how does that line get drawn for you, and how does new spaces remain genuinely for the community?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question, and one we could probably talk for the full 2 hours on, frankly, on kind of where does intervention equal gentrification or enable it. My view is that the same with most kinds of businesses, you have a community-driven version of it, or a more socially driven and minded perspective, and you have the more commercial-minded perspective. So there are now, when we first started, there weren't really any other people doing meanwhile use, but there are now much more commercial operators and developers and people doing pop-ups just for brands and really kind of interested in that more money-making side of things, and that's fine. But it's my view that they can drive gentrification if it's not managed well. Our view is always actually we operate in areas that are undergoing change already. How do we create space that supports local individuals to become part of that change? How do we build their capacity so that they can have a foot on the ladder when that future space is built? How do we enable them to have a say in what those future uses are going to be?
Emily, can I ask you a question?
Mm-hmm.
How much do you think that you're involved in replying to the council? In other words, how much do you think that you, as a creative person, are involved with using their language, their metrics, their way of seeing things as a way to respond to them or deal with them?
So I do think there is a sense of you need to be able to understand and talk the right language to be able to get people to say yes to things, but it's then what you do with that afterwards that's important.
But I mean, how much do you think the only reason I'm saying that is that sometimes, in my experience, we can get involved in their thinking and their way of seeing it, and it's not conscious. You know, suddenly and I'm not saying you're doing that, but I'm just saying as a general thing, we can sort of say back their language to them. Like I used to do a lot of diversity stuff, and I stopped because I realized that I was in a kind of programmatic situation where I was talking to people who were in my generation and were talking as if they had not heard of any of this before. And you can get blind to that when you realize, because you're not looking at people, you're responding to language, and nothing had happened in the diversity sphere because these people were caught up in not coming out of the language ghetto, not saying I'm going to drop another word here, I'm going to do something else here. And I'm not saying that you are involved in this at all, but sometimes what they do is they can bamboozle you into making you talk like them, think like them, walk like them, squawk like them, and then suddenly they got you. They just got you.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I think that the difference that I like to think is that what we do with that afterwards. So a lot of anything in the property industry is power. Like whoever holds the keys and the assets holds the power.
Yeah, absolutely.
And a lot of it is about convincing people to allow you access to that, to be able to do what you want to do with it. And so you might have to talk the talk to get the access, but then what you do with it after that is important, in my view. So it's actually, how do you approach that? How do you involve people in that journey? How do you make it for those people that would never have the access without, we see ourselves as a bit more of a kind of intermediary, I guess. So we are able to have those conversations, but then that opens the doors for those that can't necessarily. So I think it is about, particularly with property and assets, it is a fact that I don't think we're going to overcome in my lifetime, that, certain organizations hold a lot of power over property and assets. But it's more about actually, how do we diversify the uses that happen in those? How do we change perceptions of what is acceptable? That's what I can have control over and change. But I can't necessarily change that who owns a large proportion of those assets.
I mean, that leads me to a question for all of you. Who pays for the risk, and does who's paying change the capacity for that risk? Helen, you talked about getting some Arts Council funding. I imagine their role is to underwrite risk to an extent. Sorry, Helen and Alex, I know you're working with big business who want to be pirates, but just how much? Bonnie, you're working with big institutions that are taking oil and gas money, and we know that that's contentious. Who's going to pay for all of this experimentation?
Can I jump in?
Go for it.
I mean, why do you think that there's a price to be paid? That would be my question back to you. What do you think the price of risk and experimentation and failure? And essentially, that's the institutional mindset that goes, we don't trust you. We don't trust you to do anything that's in the best interests of citizens and the community. And frankly, I think most people do have the best interests, even the people we might just think are on the other side of the political spectrum to us. It's actually the institutional stuff that divides us far more than anything else. So first of all, I think we can share and hold the risk together perfectly adequately. So I don't think that's the issue. And I think what both Emily and Bonnie have spoken to now is really the issue, because we start these conversations at the systemic level of like, what's the council? How do we figure out things with the council and all of that, and looking at the institution level. And actually what it comes down to is these details, which is why I always go down to that level of detail of how are you individually going to resist those normalizing forces that will happen when you begin to come into regular dialogue with, you know, an institution, and they start to impose their normal onto you.
That's
exactly.
That's it. That's it.
Look at your language. You need to stop and go, I'm not using your acronyms. I'm not using your kind of weird jargon. Exactly. So you've got to bring it down to that. That's always what it's going to come back to. Start little crews inside your organizations that go,
right,
together, we are going to look at, you know, step back and go, we're going to practice having uncomfortable conversations. So in the moment when we most need to say what we need to say, we're not thrown, we're not, you know, when we don't, it doesn't come out in a burst of anger, which will make the other side defensive. We've thought it through, we've practiced, we know our principles, and we're holding strong, and we've got each other's back on this.
I totally with you. I mean, you know, as far as the museum is concerned, you know, the people I work with, millennials, I had a bunch of them do a research thing on Battersea Bridge. And I said to them, I want you to tell me how much of that concrete came from Jamaica. So they did it, and they found out. I said, you gonna take Battersea Bridge down? And they're like, what? I said, you're gonna take down Battersea Bridge? Are you gonna take down the pavement you're walking on? Are you gonna take down that building you're going into work in? Because this whole country is built on colonialism. So we need to actually think, as Alex is saying, as all of us is saying, how do we make new language? How do we make new language? How do we take some of the language that's thrown at us, even from people on our own side, and whatever side we're on, and turn that language and open it up? Otherwise, the system plays you, and the system always wins, because the system is amenable, it's malleable, it just shape shifts, and suddenly it's you. And I'm talking to you from a girl who marched in 1968 against the Vietnam War, against the Democratic Party putting in I did all that stuff. I did it, and I see it's back again. So that's why I'm talking to you from that space. Always question, and don't take too much of their language, because they just take from you.
Helen, can you push back to the Arts Council and not use their language?
Well, I guess having looked through the Let's Create documents for the last 2 days, a framework which organisations who want some support and potentially go in for national portfolio organisation status, my God, there's a lot of words. And my God, there are a huge amount of attachments for people to go through. And I have to say, Richard, it's probably the least creative I've felt, having sat down and gone through those attachments for the last 2 days. So there is something fundamentally wrong about the way that we frame resource in that way, and it's not accessible. You know, it's not an accessible way for us to create and be free to create. You know, that I could not have felt less creative after going through those attachments.
On purpose.
So yeah, I mean, it's a really tricky one. We do need to find new ways of existing and being able to take these risks that we want to take.
Yeah. I keep thinking of Alex and thinking about, you know, in your mind, you gotta like be swinging in with the knife and the bandana and stuff. And even if you like literally are doing it, you know, well, sometimes you have to. I always swing into the room, even if I'm not doing it. You know, all of those pages are to discourage you. They absolutely are there to discourage you. You can think of particularly people, marginalized communities, minority, you know, what is all this paper? So it's to discourage you. So that's when you got to be the pirate and swing in there and land on the table in the middle of the papers and say, right, okay, this is the one I'm going to deal with, and that's that, and scare them. They could throw you out. Always be ready to be thrown out, because that's also very important.
I would say, I'm just going to answer Laura's question or her comment. With the language thing. I hear what you're saying. You know, you've got to build bridges, but bear in mind, in my experience, every single person who's devising all that stuff also kind of, a lot of them all think that it's nonsense, but they'll be like, well, this is how I was taught to. I used to do this. I used to work in a think tank and write reports and be like, I don't even understand what I'm saying. I've been in places where the entire team doesn't know what the concept you're about to promote actually means. And it is a form of madness. So use it up to a point, but also you're there to show them something new. Like, people want to be inspired. That's, you know, obviously that's the point of art. And that is what you're doing when you're using or creating something, whether it's language or whatever. So, and you know, try it out, like try something way bolder and riskier with maybe an application that isn't going to be, and this is where I talk about like the risk and small bold actions. Like, try it out on something that's not going to be like your entire funding for the whole year, like something that's a project where you can go, this one, we're going to do something different here and see what happens. That, yeah.
Thank you. Sally's got a question, you know, about whether just by the act of using public money to fund creativity means that it's too safe or not as challenging as it could be. But I think probably we've broadly covered that in rejecting the premise in the first place, perhaps. A question about failure, which I know came up earlier, and learning from failure. And I think, Emily, you talked about that quite a lot as well. How do we get better at not fearing failure and embracing failure when we are looking at putting new ideas out there? I don't know if Bonnie, you want to take that?
Well, just to say briefly, you have to be your own sounding board at the end of the day. Now, you could get it wrong and make a mistake, but at the end of the day, you got to be in the room with yourself, and you got to know what your values are, and you got to know what matters to you and what you will not accept. Find out in yourself where they can't buy you. They can't buy you. And that means they can't give me all this money for my funding. They can't give me this building. They can't give me that because I'm not crossing that line. And know where that is. And hope you never get to that line. That's the other thing. Hope you never get there. But if you get there, and I've been there, know the Rubicon that you don't cross. And that's, I think, one way of doing it.
We've got a few minutes left, and there's one more question that I want to put to all of you, but anyone else want to take that question of failure briefly? Okay. There's so many questions, loads of comments. It's so exciting to see all people chatting on there. So apologies if we don't cover absolutely everything, but I know that all the panelists can see what you're writing, and I'm sure there'll be lots of contact details and LinkedIn swapped after this, etc. But the question I want to close on is one from Ian, which says, essentially, how do we shift things? He says, what landlords want is money, what the council want is acclaim, and what the people want is freedom, creativity, and flexibility. So if I could ask each of you to maybe summarize your angle on this and give maybe an optimistic call to action in a pithy sort of 10-20 seconds or a little bit longer, that would be brilliant. I'm going to come to Emily first.
Yeah, I thought you might. I haven't had a chance to formulate it, but I think my approach is maybe one that is not as challenging as the call to arms that Bonnie and Alex have given, but that's maybe because I'm more about like I want to get stuff done at all costs, and so my view is do those things, but in a realistic way. So find a way to bring those organizations in as partners and give them what they need or what they want. I mean, obviously not necessarily money, but find other things that they might benefit from, and bring them into it so that you can do what you want. So actually, as a kind of a person who's delivering the activity and the user, you need their approval in a way, which you might not want, but actually work with them, give them the sort of the version of that which works for them. You've got partners on board, and then you get what you need out of that to be able to make that work, and you can demonstrate through your practical delivery the benefits of what you're doing. So yeah, partner and appease, I guess, in a way, which goes against exactly what we've been saying, but to do that, to be able to take the risks that you want to take and demonstrate what you want to demonstrate.
Thank you. And a lot of this is contradictory. We have to be lots of things at the same time in order to navigate, and it's not always so clear cut. So I think that's a brave and important point to make. Thank you, Alex.
Yeah, that's an important point as well, Richard, that there's no magic formula. Like, we should all have different perspectives because we've all got different life experience. And so I would just say that, you know, when you say people want something different to what landlords want, I mean, they are people. Like, a system is all just made up of people. It's just that we feel that we are constrained by certain constructs and things that we've considered to. That's why I said about what's normal and what's acceptable. And I think you've got to get people to start to break their permission limits, because a lot of the time they want to be free and creative as well, and have the council do a different thing or do more or be different, but it just feels impossible, and it feels like there's too much risk. And I'd say the bottom line, when I talk about culture change, like the actual foundation before the risk taking, is work on building relationships with people. Like, just try and understand and empathize with people first. You might not agree, but it goes back to the uncomfortable conversations. Like, we've got to build more bridges. Like, and I agree, our generation has got to do that work. So start there, if anything.
Thank you. Helen, I'm fastly crashing out of time, and I need to wrap up with a couple of things in a moment. So brief if you can, but yeah, please let us know your thoughts.
I mean, just exactly what Alex said, in that projects will only have integrity and move forwards with the right partnerships and with the right meaning behind them, the right feeling, and that integrity is so important to how we shift landscapes and how we forge new relationships. I think if it's got the right sentiment and it comes from the heart, that sounds as pithy as you want, Richard, right? Then those projects are the ones that will succeed, because they're real.
Thank you very much. And Bonnie?
Know your limits. Know how far you're going to go. I have lots of friends around. I have a friend around here who deals with all these big real estate people in Soho. And I'm telling you, these are monsters here. And I'm in awe of him. I watch how he works with them. I watch how he talks to them. I watch how he deals with them. That is not me. So you need to know who you are and where you can function, because we can only do this much. We only can do this much. Find your space and then be in your space. I mean, it sounds corny, but that is the way to go. And if you know how to talk to those big people at the table, you sit there and you talk to them. If you don't want to deal with them, don't deal with them, but know it from inside.
Well, what an afternoon. Brilliant from all of you. Thank you so much. I know there's going to be a big virtual round of applause from all of our attendees. Thank you for your thoughtfulness and putting the presentations together, and for being so game with some often tricky questions. The next event coming up in the Igniter series will be on the 16th of February, and then there'll be 2 more in March as well. So I know there's some information coming up on the screen about those. If you've enjoyed this, you'll enjoy them. So go and book your tickets straight away. We've got some extraordinary special guests as well, looking at resilience, looking at collaboration and co-working and space, and all manner of other things. So go and have a look at those events. But the next one is in a couple of weeks. That you're going to get a feedback evaluation form sent to you. I know, one of those boring systemic things that we've just sort of railed against. It's very, very helpful for us to know what you've enjoyed most about this, or what we can do better. And do make sure that you visit the Culture in Our City website, which has all of the information about the ABC project and lots of other events. I know Emily's got a program running alongside this, which you should absolutely check out. There's the First Thursdays, which is a sort of interactive street video project happening, all sorts of brilliant things. So go and make sure that you check those out. And the video of this webinar will be on there in due course. So yeah, big thank you very much again to Alex, to Helen, to Emily and to Bonnie. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you at the next Igniter event, if not before.